Today on Read and Reaction, the articles ranking the 2022 SEC quarterbacks. Hey everybody, Will Miles here again, coming back to you with an article over at Read and Reaction. If you want the print version, you can go check it out over there. But we're doing this over on YouTube with all of our articles, putting them up and allowing you to listen to them here as well. If you like what you hear, please hit the little bell, like, subscribe, tell other people about it, email it to them. Thank you for all your support. The season is coming up. We are excited. So let's get going with the article titled Ranking the 2022 SEC Quarterbacks. A few weeks ago, Nick Knudsen took a look at what it would take for Anthony Richardson to win the Heisman Trophy. It seems like a ridiculous question to ask. After all, Richardson wasn't even the starting quarterback at Florida last year. So how are we already making him a Heisman contender? You could say the same thing about NFL mock drafts as well. ESPN's Todd McShay had Richardson going 6th overall in his way too early mock draft back in May. So what's with all the hype then? I know Richardson showed some flashes last year, but doesn't he need to improve considerably to be considered an NFL prospect, let alone a Heisman contender? Isn't someone like Mississippi State's Will Rogers, with over 1,000 pass attempts in his first 2 years at quarterback, better positioned to make a huge leap than Richardson? If you've heard any of my analysis of Rogers on Stand Up and Holler recently, you likely know my answer to that particular situation. But the goal of this article is to point out why I'm so down on Rogers and so up on Richardson, and why Richardson has the potential to be great because he doesn't need to take a leap. So with that, let's get to ranking the 2022 SEC quarterbacks. Quarterback efficiency. If you're ever having a conversation with someone about football, you can understand their level of understanding of the game by asking them one simple question. If a quarterback throws for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, did he have a good game? Most people will answer in the affirmative. After all, the quarterback clearly had the trust of his coaching staff to drop back and let the ball fly. And he also put the ball in the end zone multiple times, giving his team a chance to win. Others may say that he had a good game if he had those stats but avoided turnovers. Those answers aren't always wrong, but they aren't complete. For example, take this line from Mississippi State's Will Rogers against LSU last season. 47 completions, 62 attempts, 371 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. On its face, this looks like a pretty good outing. 3 touchdowns and 371 yards with only 1 turnover. He didn't fumble either. He also completed 76% of his throws, but it took 62 attempts for him to amass these stats. That equates to 5.99 yards per pass attempt, which is well below the FBS average for the season, 7.91. His counterpart in that game, LSU's Max Johnson, only threw for 280 yards, but he did so on 27 attempts, 10.4 yards per attempt. That's how you end up with Mississippi State outrushing LSU, 115-63 on 1 less carry, and still losing the game. Efficiency doesn't just mean throwing the ball either. In Florida's 38-14 win over Tennessee last season, Hendon Hooker threw for 221 yards, 9.6 yards per attempt, versus 209, 7.7 per attempt for Emory Jones. But Hooker ran 13 times for 23 yards, 1.8 yards per rush average, while Jones ran 15 times for 144 yards, 9.6 yards per attempt. The result is that Jones was way more efficient than Hooker, even if Hooker was more efficient throwing the ball, and Florida's offense was significantly more successful. SEC quarterback play. There are a couple of ways to roll both of these efficiencies up into one number for comparison. The first is a proprietary stat that I've developed called yards above replacement, or YAR. YAR is based on efficiencies from a yards per attempt basis, but then normalizes the numbers to the average for all FBS quarterbacks. The result is that a YAR of 0.0 is average, 1.0 is a solid starter, and 2.0 is approaching Heisman territory. So where do the returning quarterbacks in the SEC rank when it comes to YAR? Well, what I've done here is I've plotted quarterback touches versus YAR. The yellow line is the average, and it's right around 0.0, even for the SEC. This tells us something about how efficient a quarterback is and how often he was used. Obviously, as a quarterback has more touches, his efficiency usually goes down. The first thing that should jump out to Florida fans is that Anthony Richardson had the best YAR in 2021 of any quarterback who's coming back in 2022. Now, this isn't saying that Richardson is the best returning quarterback, as he only had 148 touches compared to 628 for Bryce Young. However, this does reinforce the first round mock draft talk. What this says to me is that Richardson was incredibly efficient in the opportunities that he got. And if he can maintain that efficiency over a full season's worth of touches, he's going to be in the running for some serious hardware. The other thing you can see from this plot is why I'm so down on Rodgers. He had the most touches of anyone in the conference and was significantly below average on those touches. Some of that is what Mike Leach wants to do on offense, but a big chunk of it is Rodgers as well. This also says that the Max Johnson for Zach Calzada swap between LSU and Texas A&M is pretty much a wash. Those hoping that Jimbo Fisher is going to knock off Darth Saban are going to have to hope for Haynes King to be the real deal, because otherwise they're looking into a dark future with Max Johnson doing exactly what Calzada did for them last season. But maybe you don't like YAR, that YAR uses a yards per attempt average as its basis. After all, gaining 3 yards on 3rd and 1 is way more valuable than on 3rd and 7. Luckily, there's a stat that takes down and distance into account, called expected points per attempt, or PPA. The story using this metric is much the same. Rodgers ranks a little bit closer to average. The value of Bryce Young shows up here a little bit more. Stetson Bennett again grades out well. Richardson is a little bit closer to average on this one, but still well above it. Most of that is because he is penalized heavily for the turnovers against Georgia and LSU. Those turnovers did happen. He'll have to eliminate most of them in 2022 for the Gators. But it was surprising to me that he ranked as highly as he does on a per-play basis. Takeaway. A lot of people are picking the Gators to finish 4th in the SEC East this season. Given this analysis, that may end up looking really, really foolish. South Carolina's Spencer Rattler had much better talent at Oklahoma than he will with the Gamecocks, yet was replaced after performing right around average by both metrics. Admittedly, his 2020 season was much better, but I don't think we should sleep on the fact that there weren't any fans in the stands that season, and when he finally had to deal with some crowd noise, things headed south. Kentucky's Will Levis, another mock draft darling, performed just slightly above average. Maybe he was better after the Gators' loss against Kentucky, but Levis wasn't the reason the Wildcats won that game. And without wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson, center Luke Fortner, and tackle Darian Kennard, Levis is going to have to step up in a major way. Tennessee's Hooker is the guy in the SEC East that I worry about. He was good at Virginia Tech, quarterback rating of 159.8 over 312 attempts, and even better last year at Tennessee, 181.4 on 303 attempts. He was still battling Joe Milton somewhat for the quarterback job when Florida popped up on the schedule early on. But I do find it interesting that Tennessee is coming into 2022 with as much hype as they are, given their 7-6 record. It's not like the Vols switched to Hooker and never lost another game. In fact, if you ignore the win over FCS Tennessee Tech, they went 5-5 with Hooker at the helm. Vanderbilt's Mike Wright was way better than Ken Seals, but that isn't saying all that much. Missouri is starting a guy with 58 attempts who is way less efficient than Richardson. Georgia is pretty sad with Bennett at quarterback, and with all the other talent in Athens, is going to be difficult to dethrone. None of these numbers are a guarantee. Richardson could get injured early on, and Florida would be screwed. But you could say the exact same thing about Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, and perhaps even Georgia. So I get picking Florida behind Georgia. Stetson Bennett was really good last year, albeit with limited usage. But to pick the Gators behind these other teams requires projections that their quarterbacks are going to improve their efficiency, as opposed to Richardson, who just needs to increase his touches. Essentially, Spencer Rattler or Will Levis are going to have to take the leap. Richardson doesn't need to leap anywhere. He's already at the high end of efficiency when it comes to SEC quarterbacks. All he needs is a coach who will give him touches, which is perhaps the biggest difference in the Gators between 2021 and 2022. So that's my take on the SEC quarterbacks. If you head over to readandreaction.com, you can actually see those plots that I was talking about here, see where these guys rank, and really sort of gives you an idea that there's about half of these SEC quarterbacks who are coming back, who are being penciled in, who really aren't above average. And so to think that Florida's going to finish fourth in the East, or to think that Florida's going to finish 6-6, I think is a little bit of wishful thinking when it comes to people who are saying, hey, Napier may struggle right off the bat. Look, I mean, it may take some time. Richardson may not be as efficient. Obviously, with Ricky Pearsall having the injury that was announced today, maybe that impacts some stuff that Richardson's able to get done. And certainly Florida's schedule is not fantastic when you think about Utah and Kentucky opening it up and then having that stretch where you've got LSU, Georgia, and Texas A&M later in the year. But still, what we're looking at is quarterbacks win games. And the team with the best quarterback almost always wins the game unless there's a talent differential. And the only games where Florida's going to have a talent differential are going to be Texas A&M and Georgia. And so if you start looking at this schedule and saying, where can a guy like Anthony Richardson really make a difference? It's in the games against Utah and Kentucky and Tennessee. It's in the games against South Carolina. You shouldn't need him against Vanderbilt, but it's in the games against LSU. So you start looking at those and say, with Emory Jones at the helm, those were 50-50 propositions, or maybe even 40-60 or 30-70 against Florida. But with Anthony Richardson, if he can maintain that efficiency, now all of a sudden you're looking at things starting to move in Florida's favor. Does that mean I think they're winning the SEC East? No, I think Georgia wins the SEC East. Does it mean that I think that Florida is going to outperform expectations? Absolutely. And I'm not really a gambling person. I don't go out and gamble all that much, but the odds for Anthony Richardson winning the Heisman are something like, I think it's plus 6,000. So you bet $50 to win $3,000. And let's just put it this way. If he goes out and puts up a big performance against Utah, those odds are going to change. You'll be able to cash out pretty quick. So anyway, should be fun. Season's coming up here in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for supporting Read and Reaction, and we will see you next time.